So we're going to talk about the draft CDSBC policy development process right now. And if you haven't seen it yet or would like to have it in front of you and don't quite have it yet in front of you, there are handouts here, and you can see on the screen where to find your handouts. If you're on a desktop, there should be a drop-down menu under audio to be able to find your handouts. If you're on an Apple operating system, say an iPad, then it's along the bottom. And if you're on an Android operating system, then it's along the top. So if you have any questions about that, please do let us know in chat or by raising your hands. So there are 4 phases of the policy development process. The first one is to identify the issues and getting really clear on what is it we're trying to be doing here. The second phase is to develop the policy through conversation and research. The third stage is to share the policy and get broader feedback and communicate it out once it is confirmed. And then finally, to review it on an ongoing basis to ensure that it's still effective. So if those are the 4 phases, let's dive in a little bit. So the first phase here is phase 1, which we call identify. And I should say that throughout each phase, and we heard this during the workshop, an emphasis on communicating to registrants and stakeholders throughout each phase. And also to remember that we have to determine and pursue an optimal level of engagement at each phase and for each issue. So at the beginning, an issue is identified. That goes back to one of the things we heard during my interviews, is that we need to get clear on how is it decided when an issue becomes policy, considered for policy. And some of the things that are identified here is that it may be through the board's strategic plan, it might be raised by working committee, a board member, registrant, staff, stakeholder, a variety of different places. But what's most important is where it comes from is, does it resonate as being that it is a problem that actually requires policy. So let's move through the policy response. So after the issue is identified, there's time spent clarifying the problem and the desired outcome. And there may be some limited targeted consultation there to really get a full understanding. Then it's the board responsibility to weigh the suitability of an issue for policy. If it's not suitable, no policy is pursued and the initiator of the policy is notified. There may be other options to explore. But if it is suitable for policy, and I'm going to go to the right-hand side here, the board may direct staff to make an operational policy, and then the decision is communicated. But if it is something that is of a different nature and it's not operational, a committee will be asked by the board to consider the policy, and that's where the mandate letter comes. So that's where we move to phase 2 and then developing. So I'll follow the committee mandate letter from the board. There may be a quick notification of the Ministry of Health and other BC health regulators as a courtesy to let them know this is what we're thinking about, just in case somebody else happens to be working on the same issue at the same time, so that there is a collegiality. Then the committee undergoes research, and there's a variety of different ways of approaching this, of course. The committee research will flow in and out of initial targeted consultation with registrants, stakeholders, and possibly even a focus group with the public if it was that kind of issue, and analysis. And those 3 steps might go back and forth for a bit until it gets clear on what are the options that are worth pursuing. At some point, there will be a high-level notification to registrants, so registrants are aware that this is occurring. Once the analysis gets to a place where a policy draft is appropriate, that policy is drafted. And if it's a bylaw only, then it'll be a check-in with the Ministry of Health just to ensure that it is in accordance with any kind of regulatory requirements. And then the committee gives a formal update to the board. The board may decide to edit it because they are the elected individuals that are responsible for steering the college. And if so, they'll ask the committee to redraft. Or it may say, great, let's put this out for broad consultation. And this is the stage I think that many of you are already familiar with, where moving to phase 3, registrants and stakeholders are notified and there's a formal consultation. Something's posted on the website. There's a period for you to give feedback. And here you'll see that input will be acknowledged, that it's been received. The committee will do some analysis of that input and use it, apply it, to create a final draft. Again, a quick checking in with the Ministry of Health just as a courtesy, and then the board will respond to the draft. That is in result to the input gathered through the consultation process. Now, the board may decide to request edits, in which case the committee may redraft, there may be additional consultation or not, and then when the policy is ready for approval, it will be communicated out to registrants and stakeholders. It will be implemented. And the last phase is after the implementation of the policy, the relevance of that policy will be assessed as required. For example, every 2 years, perhaps. If it's irrelevant, the policy is retired. If it is relevant, then perhaps there's a revision process, or perhaps there isn't. If there is a revision process required, you'll be able to see in the full version that it might go up to the committee for a redraft or might go back out to consultation dependent on the issues. So those are the 4 phases. Now, I understand that there's a lot of detail here, and clearly this is a level of detail that's not going to be used to communicate out on a regular basis. But we wanted to give you a deeper dive into the various steps for you to consider, does this look right to you? Is this the kind of policy that would be a process, that would be effective for getting your input, for creating policy that actually does resonate with the broader community? So, sorry, I'm curious about if folks have done the survey. I'm going to ask you one last question here on a poll, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll invite you to raise your hands and type in questions or observations that you may have about what you've heard. But first, let's get one last question that I'm going to ask to you, which is about the survey. So, will you or have you completed the survey? Please select one of the following. I've completed it already, I plan to complete it, or no, I don't plan to fill it out. Great. Thank you, everyone, for voting. They're coming in quickly. I'll just leave it open for just a minute more. Great. And I'm just about to close it. Perfect. And here's the results. So a third of us have completed it, 2/3 of us plan to complete it, and the extra piece, no, I don't plan to fill it out. I'd love to hear why. If you're up for it, just you can put it in the chat to us privately or as a question. We'd love to hear about that from you. Okay, so I'm going to close the results here, and at this stage, I will invite you to press the little hand symbol to let us know that you're willing to jump in and warm up the waters for everyone else and make a comment or ask a question. In the meantime, I'll just take a look here at the questions, and it looks like Mark.
Dr. Spur.
Yeah, Dr. Spur, you mentioned something about the 5 areas are determined by the college or by the HPA. Is there a comment you'd like to make about that?
Sure, and I've answered it actually on the to Mark. Okay. Really, there's no magic to it. They're kind of commonly considered categories of policy in the regulatory environment. They're not our labels particularly. They're out there in the wild. So you can split them any way. And as I say, there's no real magic other than a little bit of a hierarchy, in fact, from the perspective that there's first the legislation, then the bylaws. In fact, in between that, there's the regulation, which we don't have there, but that's entirely in the hands of government. Then the bylaws, which is a shared piece between us and government, and then there's standards and guidelines, which is common parlance for how regulators provide regulatory policy or advice to registrants. And then the last is governance, which is, as I say, is a common parlance for how a corporation, actually, of which we're a special type, governs itself, and the rest is operational. Great, thank you. How about you, David? Is there any thing that you'd like to raise at this point?
The comment that I would make, a couple of people that have completed the survey have commented it seems awful complicated, the flow sheet. And I think what helps is to go actually through it the way you've done now, because you can see what the process is of consultation with committees and with the board and back and forth. And really my comment would be that a lot of this particularly phase 2 and phase 3, we already do. You know, we are in the habit of having a strategic plan of where the board has discussed it with themselves, with staff, received input from different places in order to formulate this plan. And then we have the habit of going to a committee and saying, look, we would like you to engage in this research in this area. We're looking at doing something like this. And then the committee goes and does the work. And very often they will come back and you know, either the chair of the committee or somebody from that committee will come and present a draft document to the board for discussion. And very often the board will have a discussion after that and make comments back to the committee. And so what you've outlined for us in this process, I think is working, and very often there is this back and forth that you were talking about. So I think we have already a lot of good frameworks for this. The issue I think that some people are questioning is, where is this coming from? And you outlined this at the very beginning. Where do these policies get identified? And I think those of us that have been around the board, and those of you that are in the audience tonight who are in the board or in committees, know that a lot of the issues that come up are either from legislation requirements. You know, the patient boundaries issues was the requirement by the HPA to have a patient relations program, and we avoided that for years because we knew it was going to be a difficult conversation. And finally, the board decided that it was time to have this conversation. Again, there is issues to do with you know, what to do with the money that the college has in the bank, and policy. Where is an example, I think, of a policy that the Audit and Finance Committee took this year of what to do with term deposits, etc. Something that we didn't go to anybody outside of the board, outside of the Audit Committee. Well, they went by the Audit Committee to the board for discussion, but you know, presentations were done within the board in order to decide on the policy of what to do with this money. So I think those are sort of two extremes of where we've gone to white consultation and where we don't. So from my point of view, I think it's good to have this framework, and I hope it gives people some sort of comfort that there is not a loosey-goosey, you know, fly by the seat of our pants type of decision making that comes with policy development. I think we have some good structure there. We certainly can improve it, and I think that's the whole idea of engaging you, Susanna, and having this conversation to improve the process. But you know, the process is not coming from a single individual of the board or the registrar or some other staff. No doubt we receive suggestions and comments. You know, Jerome is in contact with other health regulators, with government. In conversations we have nationally, we have discussions of what other jurisdictions are doing. So all of that sort of helps inform the board and helps our strategic plan, which ends up being the driving force.
Right. Great. Thank you. And I think that makes that underlines the fact that the board truly is responsible for determining what comes through it, and that the strategic plan is something that sets the direction over time. You'll see here in the 4 phases, the identify, develop, share, and review, that there are some fairly basic steps that are being taken in terms of really getting clear on what needs to be achieved, and then having a conversation that helps to uncover the key issues. And so that's the intention of this revised draft. It looks like we have a couple questions that have come in. So so I'll start with Catherine Barano. Would you be willing to, Catherine, to ask your question over voice? If so, please put up your hand by pressing the little button. And if not, then I'll put a thank you mark. And Catherine, great. So Catherine, I'm going to unmute you, and we welcome your reflection. Go ahead, please. Or is our speaker up?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
we can. Thank you.
Well, isn't this fun? I've never really participated this way with a webinar. This is exciting.
Will you sing us a song?
Oh, I don't know if you want to hear me sing.
Yeah, at 7:30.
I wouldn't quit my day job over singing, that's for sure. So I tell you, at one point I did think I sounded like Shania Twain.
I think at some point we all do.
I did really enjoy having it broken down the way you did in the verbal sense. Sometimes looking at a piece of paper that appears to have a lot of arrows in different directions can be a bit overwhelming. So seeing it broken down really made a difference for me. A question that I had was, I like the idea that we're going to review every 2 years or so, like just sort of throwing out a number, but going from identification to a policy, how long do we see that timeline?
It's a great question. I'll briefly answer. I think it's dependent on the issue and its complexity, but as board chair, David, what would you say?
Well, again, my two examples, this decision by the board to change its investment policy with the funds that we have from year to year was done fairly quickly. The Finance Committee with the chair and the committee did some research and put some suggestions to the board, and the decision was made fairly quickly. I foresee that in the next year we're going to do have a fairly big discussion on quality assurance changes, on how we review our competencies and so forth. And the board, we have been working on this already for over a year in committee work. The board has not seen very much so far, but I foresee that in the next few months it will. But I could see that taking another year before we actually are prepared to go and have a discussion with the membership at any great length, simply because it's such an extensive policy if we're going to change how we do our quality assurance. So
well, that's actually a nice lead into Mark's question. And so, Mark, I'm going to unmute you, and please go ahead, and we'd love to hear your comment and question.
It does take a second, Mark, for the mic to activate. And you may need to activate your mic on your side if you've muted it.
Mark has a very sexy voice, so it should be easy to hear it. It's a good baritone bass.
Okay, we can't hear you quite yet. So, Mark, I will paraphrase your question, and I'll leave you unmuted for a few moments to see if you can jump in. So I was saying that it's a nice transition from Catherine's question to Mark's question, because he was asking about in phase one, will the registrants be engaged about what they may be thinking about an identified issue, or is the proposal to go to registrants after the issue is sent to committee? And it looks like Jerome wants to jump in there, so go ahead and then I can fill in any blanks.
First of all, thank you, Mark. It is a great question, and what we're trying to do, we identified this some time ago, is to try and move that conversation upstream as early as possible. And the other trick is we don't want to, what tends to happen is a lot of work gets done and a draft gets formulated and it goes out for consultation. And people feel that it's so well developed already that they haven't had a significant opportunity to comment earlier on, or they feel that it's already a decided issue, which it isn't, but the perception is perfectly understandable. So the idea there in phase one is really to, in my view, I think what works, and this is something that's obviously got to be fleshed out more, is having a conceptual conversation first. This sort of design development type of conversation around, here's a big issue that we're thinking about, we think it's important, here's why we think it's important, here's some of the big questions around this issue that we're wrestling with, and then put that out to conversation, whether it's generally or in focus groups, depending on the it'll dictate that. To then say, okay, what do others think about this, and get some preliminary more input and analysis, and then do some good analysis, and then take it to the next step, the next development phase, and then out again for that consultation.
That's great.
So I think that's the nirvana to which we're planning to go. Clearly, there are, and in most policies, that's appropriate, and the trick is determining when for which types of policy. Because some are so convoluted and so legalistic, for example, and necessary because the legislation requires it. How do we do that? And that's something that we'll continue to have a conversation with consultants and experts and the community, the registering community, and the stakeholder community.
Thanks, Jerome. And Jerome, I think very nicely outlined the goals of each conversation and the ways it might approach. And I might add to that the idea is that the engagement might be cascadingly larger. That in phase one in the identification piece, it might be the committee chair picking up the phone and calling 5 people who have different views from each other and the committee to get a sense of what's at stake here? What do people care about? Whereas early in phase 2, it may be some of those focus groups or sitting down with specialist societies. And then later on in phase 2, after you've had enough thoughtful conversation to create a draft that feels like this is good enough that we want to have a sense with the broader membership, then it goes to a larger conversation. So sort of think about it in these cascading circles. So Chiku, I noticed that you have a question, so I'm going to unmute you, and hopefully we'll be able to hear your voice. So Chiku, please, and excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know if your formal title, so come on in, and what are your thoughts or questions?
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Formal title is Your Excellency, but that's okay for us. Even just
I'd like to go by that too.
we must belong to the same principality. No, thank you so much for putting this together. And what I did enjoy is the way that that slide on good policy is laid out quite nicely. I think it encompasses every aspect that like one would describe with regards to that. The 2 little boxes that are somewhat intriguing, and certainly I think they're a welcome addition to the 9 that may invite some ambiguity or questions going forward, is the one that says considers unintended consequences. Sometimes some individuals or registrants certainly may wonder, what's the genesis of some of the things that come up for policy, for review. And this is a slippery slope sometimes because you want to be vigilant and forward-thinking, but at the same token, others may view this as being something that's brought out in terms of opening a can of worms that should not be. But I think it's a fantastic sort of contribution to what is good policy. But that concept tends to invite potential thoughts that, is this necessary? And the second point regarding the monitoring, the lower right box, in terms of reviewing on a regular basis, I'm just curious, how does this vary? How often are things reviewed, and will different items be reviewed on a different basis, or is it something on a continual basis that the policy will be revisited?
Great. Those are good questions. David, you want to start?
Well, I agree with you. I think there's no doubt that certain things will need review more often, and others perhaps not as often. There's no doubt that there's on certain policies, for example, the sedation policy that got modified in the last year. I mean, that policy was there for quite a long time, and really in the end did not get changed so drastically, even though people were not aware that the policy existed, and that perhaps was our error in not outlining that from the start. But that policy is one that is certainly a living one, and the fact that more people are doing sedation or different people are getting involved in that modality means that policy needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. The other point you made about how issues are identified, I agree with you. I mean, that is the one part where I think there's perhaps confusion. I don't think the board ever felt that it was doing something without justification or the identification of why a policy was being put out needed to be verbalized. I think now we quite honestly realize that the membership wants to know where things are coming from, and I think we've learned from that. And I would think that we will do more of letting the membership know and the public know why we're going and looking at a policy in this issue, why it's become you know, an important part of our strategic plan and so forth. So I think both points you made were very good ones.
Did you want to add?
I don't know, you want to add anything, Jerome?
No, I think, you know, in terms of every policy that is put out, every regulatory policy, as well as actually our organizational policies, has a review date on it. And the board will determine that based on the type of policy. And then every committee has a list of policies that they periodically need to review. And as you mentioned, the interesting, the boundaries policy predated my existence at the college. In fact, a workshop was underway as I was coming on board, and that came from the government itself. The sedation, as you mentioned, was one where it's up for regular review and had gone through a number of iterations. The radiology likewise was a review of existing work. It had been on the Quality Assurance Committee's agenda for some period of time, and it had come from conversation in the academic community. Likewise, sleep apnea had come to the board, had identified that through its contacts with the academic community, with what was happening out in practice, and with what the Quality Assurance Committee was seeing out in practice trends. The suite of corporate policies, so to speak, things like advertising promotion, that was something that was raised by the BCDA and others, and so on, I should say, without sort of listing every policy in its genesis. One of the things that we want to tweak in the system is in the board's role around boundary scanning amongst the various stakeholders to find out what, and including the committees in that, to find out what's at issue out there, what's of interest in the profession, amongst stakeholders within the public. And then it's a matter of prioritizing. I think, Catherine, you asked the question, you know, what gets to first base and how soon? The answer there is urgency, the board's perspective of what has relative urgency, relative weight, and what resources we have to tackle.
The other area I think that has been a driver is through the complaint and discipline process. There's no doubt that through reviewing where the complaints are coming from and why there's issues, those have also been drivers for new policy. You know, inability by the inquiry committee to deal with certain issues because the policy was not clear, or there was changing an environment, or changing education, or changing standards in the profession, which needed to be updated, so a policy had to be reviewed. So I think the direction, or why we decide on certain policies comes from a variety of sources, and some are internal and some certainly external.
Folks, Dr. Spur actually has a comment. I'm going to see, Mark, if you can unmute. You're unmuted on our side. On your control panel, you might see your microphone with a red with a line through it. If you click on that, I suspect it unmutes, because it's showing that you're muted on your side by you. So let's see if we can get your mic to work. Otherwise, I'll read the comment that you sent in. 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right. So technically, we're not there quite yet. So what Mark had mentioned in his comment to us is, and I'll say it with much gratitude, Mark spent countless
Oh,
hours.
looks like Mark, maybe you've
yeah,
come
Mark,
through.
you might be on.
I'm on
Give it
here
a-
now.
Well
Oh,
done.
Yeah.
good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, great. What Jerome was alluding to was as I was listening to the questions about policy, I sat on a working group, and this was a perfect example of how well the policy system works, process works. It happened to be the mild and moderate sedation working group, and it was 5 years, 28 drafts later before anything was accepted or by either the committee or the board. So, I mean, it's not some fly-by-night process where we go and write something and say, okay, this is what it's going to be. It was a long process, and all of the comments that came back in the public consultation, excuse me, from the members, every last one of those pieces was reviewed, discussed, and either adopted or set aside. So it does work.
Thank you, Mark. And I would just concur from the interviews I held with other members of other committees that everyone talked about going through every single piece of input received and carefully considering it. And I think that that's just even one indicator of the fact that the college has a strong practice already in doing good policy development and engaging people. And where we're emphasizing additional resources and steps is in transparency and earlier engagement. And I think that those are really the two major changes. So we're getting towards the end of time. I'm going to turn it over to Jerome for a quick comment, and then David to wrap us up. And if anybody has any additional quick questions or comments, I encourage you to raise your hand. We'll certainly make space for you, or to write it in as a question. Over to you, Jerome.
Mark, I was just going to, first of all, thank you for the many hours of work that you did spend on that committee, the subcommittee, and then the committee itself. And I just, with some wry humor, point out that policy, going through the multiple rounds of consultation that it did, many hundreds of comments in each round, is one of those policies that some of are complaining about as being out of touch and out of step, and with the colleges being the process is broken down. So we're trying, and we'll try and improve even on that, which I think you've identified, and I agree, was an incredibly involved process. There's room for continuous improvement. That's what we want here. That's been my mantra and my commitment since I started with this organization in 2012, and what I've seen the board very, very heavily dedicated to and committed to a very well-functioning board that has public interest and the health of the profession in mind, which are hand in glove, in my view and many others. And it ain't easy, but if it isn't, if it wasn't easy, if it was easy, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the final words come to me. My only comment would be thank you for attending. I think this is a fascinating venue to have a discussion with people from around the province. You know, I've been thinking of slowing down my teaching at the university. Maybe this is the way that I can do it from Palm Springs, and engage everybody. It's been a learning experience for us all, but I think a good process. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend and to comment, and please keep on being engaged and engaging the board, because the communication back and forth is what helps for everybody to feel comfortable that this college is on the right track. So again, thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Anita, for putting this together, and Susanna, my heartfelt thanks for engaging us in this and helping us improve ourselves, because that's the whole point of going through this whole ordeal. So thank you again. I don't know if you want to say some last minute things, but it's 8:30, and thank you again very much, everybody, and good night.
Good night.
Go and enjoy the sunshine.
Good night. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.